After the bridge is destroyed, Thorkel catches up to them. With only one spear of Thorkel, 3 of Askeladd's men turned into a shish kebab. Everyone is scared. Some of Askeladd's men shows anger and questions him. Askeladd tells them they only need to march forward, but his doubtful men surround him. They want to give the prince to Thorkel in exchange of their lives. Askeladd tells them he had hated the Danes from the beginning and started killing his own men. Bjorn and Thorfinn fled the scene. Thorkel found it outrageous and rushed to join the fight. Atli tried to convince Bjorn, but they failed and killed his horse instead. After the crash, Thorfinn went after Askeladd, leaving only Bjorn to defend the prince. Askeladd was tired, but he kept killing his former companions. He lost his temper for a second and cut a man in half. The others were scared and tried to shoot him with arrows. Askeladd told them it would be better if they kept him alive as a hostage, so they shot him in the leg. Thorgrim asked why Askeladd was desperately trying to defend the prince. Askeladd struggled to get up. Thorfinn rushed toward them. Right before finishing Askeladd, Thorkel and his men arrived. Everyone dropped their weapons. Thorgrim told Thorkel he had wanted to surrender the prince to them, but Thorkel was more interested in talking with Askeladd. When Thorkel asked for Thorfinn, Askeladd said he had not been part of this rebellion. By Thorkel's order, everyone other than Askeladd was to die. Thorkel and his men told them to take up their arms and die like true warriors. Thorfinn then arrived and rushed towards Askeladd, but Thorkel threw him and his horse away with just one punch, greeting him. Thorfinn then threatened Thorkel, saying that if he laid even a finger on his prey Askeladd, he would also take Thorkel down. Thorkel, who had so far assumed that Askeladd was the Finn's boss, was taken aback by Thorfinn's demand for Askeladd, and so the situation was turned into a duel. Thorkel's men were impressed with Thorfinn. When Thorkel told them that he was as brave as Thor's, Thorfinn questioned who Thorkel was to his father. Thorkel was surprised that Thors had not told him anything about himself. Thorfinn then said that he had heard that Thorkel was descended from a Jarl, but Thorkel corrected him, saying that it was actually Helga who was from a family of Jarls, and that Thors had risen through the ranks due to his skill with the sword. Thorkel then asked for entertainment before talking further, to which Thorfinn responded by saying that he would go easy on him so that he could talk. Thorkel's men started laughing at him, but Thorkel silenced them. Canute then heard the sound of battle nearby and wished he never had to open his eyes again. In his dream, Ragnar asked forgiveness for raising him as a normal child, and Canute wished he had been born as Ragnar's son instead of King Sven's. Bjorn and the others were then fighting over the prince, and Thorfinn was proving to be a worthy opponent against Thorkel. Thorkel says there is still something missing before Thorfinn achieves perfection as a warrior. Thorkel asks Thorfinn what it means to be a true warrior, reminding him of his father. Meanwhile, the priest and Canute are talking about something that made Canute open his eyes. Thorfinn aims for Thorkel's limbs, but his cuts are too shallow. Thorkel then gives him a hard kick, which Thorfinn dampens with his leg before falling on some branches and hitting the ground. Bjorn, after smashing someone's face into a tree, goes toward the prince. Canute, instead of running, gathers his resolve and faces the danger. When Bjorn finally comes to his senses, Atli stabs him. Canute orders the priest to treat Bjorn and Atli to help him. He also wants to see Thorkel, or else they won't be able to transport the wounded without borrowing their sleds. Canute finally starts acting like a king. Upon seeing Thorkel, Thorfinn stands up and realizes his arm is broken. Askeladd then starts treating Thorfinn's wound, while Thorkel begins to tell his story. He was also a commander like Thor's in the Jomsvikings, and their leader Sigvaldi liked Thor's and gave him one of his daughters. Thorkel also reveals he is Thorfinn's great uncle. In one battle, Thor fell into the sea and everyone thought he was dead. 3 months later, Thorkel found out that Thors was alive. Thors told him he couldn't stay in this town and fight anymore, so when Thorkel tried to stop him, Thors knocked him out. Thorkel asked Thorfinn about how Thor had lived his life and, when Thorfinn couldn't answer, Thorkel mocked him. Askeladd remembered Thorkel's weakness from a past battle and offered to advise Thorfinn, for their own sake. Thorfinn played weak and lured Thorkel closer. When Askeladd used his trick, Thorfinn jumped and kicked Thorkel's weak spot. Then Thorfinn blinded Thorkel with his bare fingers. Thorkel's men tried to kill Thorfinn, but Thorkel stopped them. Their interference was a humiliation to Thorkel. Before things got worse, Canute stepped in to stop everyone. Thorkel accepted his defeat and released Thorfinn. Thorkel had no intention of letting Canute go, but Canute explained why he had no value as a hostage and wanted to fight the king. Thorkel tested Canute's resolve. Thorkel regretted not following Thor's years ago, so this time he decided to help Canute fight King Sven. After a big laugh, Askeladd admitted to killing Ragnar, giving Canute the choice of his head or his service. Canute chose to spare his life. Canute orders Thorkel, who once betrayed the main army, to go drink with the leaders of the clans in order to mend things up. Since Prince Harald is in Denmark, Askeladd suggests that assassination is a good choice, as it will make Canute the commander of the army in England. Canute aims to create a paradise on earth, a peaceful and prosperous place. King Sven greets Canute, Askeladd, and Thorfinn. Thorfinn notices that it is an ambush, yet they enter the hall anyway. King Sven orders Canute to rise and step closer. He then reveals that he chased out his father, the former king, because he was cruel and cowardly. According to Sven, the crown has its own will and the crown's will controls the power, not the king's. King Sven then offers Canute a part of Cornwall, and states that he will kill the prince if he refuses. Askeladd asks permission to speak and argues that Prince Canute did a great service by recruiting Thorkel as one of his followers, thus making London unprotected. King Sven notices that Askeladd is good with words and asks his name. When Askeladd reveals that his father did not give him a name, King Sven figures he must be a child his father forced one of his slaves to have. Hearing this makes Askeladd furious, but he endures it. Convinced by Askeladd, King Sven says he will throw a banquet in honor of Canute in York and leaves the hall. Askeladd and Canute talked about how to kill the king, and they decided to wait for their chance. Ragnar's brother Gunnar arrived and greeted Canute in a hearty manner. Canute informed him of his brother's death and said he wouldn't be going into exile. Askeladd, while taking a piss, saw how hard Thorfinn was training. Atli came to apologize to Askeladd. He wanted to go home since his brother had also gone mad. Askeladd gave him his bracelet as a parting gift. Years later, Leif was still looking for Thorfinn in the slave market. York, under the control of Vikings led by King Sven, was being used as a base for exporting slaves all over Europe. Leif's companion suggested it was time to let go of his search and return home, but Leif wanted to repay his debt to Thors no matter what. Canute and Askeladd entered the city, and Leif recognized Askeladd. He was running to confront him when an arrow shot Canute, right before the assassin escaped. Thorfinn, who was already in the city, killed the assassin. Leif recognized Thorfinn, but Thorfinn seemed not to know him. Before Leif could say anything, soldiers rushed to arrest them, thinking Thorfinn was also the culprit. When they didn't believe Thorfinn, he punched one of them. After seeing Thorfinn's knives, one of the soldiers recognized him and told the others he was the one who had defeated Thorkel the Tall in a duel. After that, Thorfinn also recognized Leif. Soldiers carry the prince's body to a safe place and cut his clothes to treat the wound. They discover the prince was a woman all along. But no, it was only a deceptive move devised by Askeladd and Canute to publicize that the prince was in danger. Meanwhile, Thorfinn and Leif catch up. Thorfinn still wants his revenge, while Leif wants him to go see his mother that he left behind. Thorfinn can't let go of his revenge. Askeladd visits the injured Bjorn and, after some small talk, leaves to spread rumors about an assassination attempt against the prince. This will prevent the king from issuing any orders that would put the prince in a disadvantage. Askeladd suggests to Canute not to trust Gunnar and sends Thorfinn after him to make sure he is a spy. Askeladd wants to use Gunnar to feed information they want of the king instead of killing him. The next day, both Thorfinn and Bjorn want to duel Askeladd. He faces Bjorn first, who wanted to die in combat like a true warrior. After sending off his only friend, Askeladd faces Thorfinn unarmed. Askeladd, knowing Thorfinn's habits well, easily beats him. Thorkel asks the reason for their duel, but Canute doesn't know. Canute stops the duel and wants Thorfinn to wait until his right hand is healed. Askeladd explains that once Thorfinn loses his temper, he can tell where he is going to attack. While Thorfinn catches his breath, Askeladd tells his story about how to kill a man you hate, so Thorfinn and Canute can learn from it. Askeladd's mother was a slave and he used to work in a blacksmith's shop and stable. People called him Askeladd, meaning covered in ash, since his body was always covered in ashes, coal, or horse manure. His father, Olaf, was from a powerful family in Jutland and had kids with random women everywhere, but he only named the older kids he had with his legal wife. Askeladd hated his father, since he heard that when his mother got sick, Olaf treated her like a dog. Askeladd's mother often used to tell the story of a heroic general called Ertorius, one of their ancestors who once united the whole Britannia. One day, as his mother clung to Olaf, Askeladd picked up a sword and attacked him. Olaf realized that Askeladd was the child of him and his slave, and saw his potential, so he accepted him into his hall. Askeladd knew he wasn't a match for him, so he behaved in the hall and got close to the rest of the family. Eventually, everyone started to accept him as Olaf's son. After 2 years, Askeladd found the best opportunity to kill the man he hated most. He used his half-brother's sword to shift the blame from himself. Even after the story, Thorfinn still wanted to kill Askeladd, so Askeladd thanked him for his hard work and for being useful to him in exchange for these duels. After Askeladd left with Bjorn's body, Thorfinn reflected on his past. Elders gathered at York, talking about the assassination attempt and their future plans. King Sven and others entered the hall. Thorfinn was lying on the ground, and he imagined Askeladd. He followed the illusion senselessly. After grabbing his cloak, Thorfinn realized it was not Askeladd, and the man he had grabbed kicked absent-minded Thorfinn to the ground. Thorfinn beat 3 of them anyway, and soldiers arrested him for making trouble. King Sven declared that England had finally come under his control and thanked God for Thorkel and Canute's return. He entrusted Mercia, the most prosperous land within England, to Canute's rule and told Ireland that it would be their next battleground. Askeladd was happy that the king was reacting just as he had expected. Right at this moment, the king continued to say that he had sent a messenger to Wales to urge them to become his vassals, but since they had refused twice, he wanted to kill the seeds of rebellion before they became a threat to his new territory. Floki noticed that Askeladd was shocked. Leif visited Thorfinn in prison and told him about his past to encourage Thorfinn to return to Iceland, his home. Floki informed King Sven that Wales might be Askeladd's weakness. Askeladd was trying hard to think of a way to stop the invasion of Wales. Thorkel questions Askeladd about why Welsh people helped Danes like them when they were running from him. Askeladd tells the truth and calls Wales his country, and asks Thorkel to keep it quiet. Then it is time for Askeladd to take his prize from the king. While Askeladd is taking his prize, the king tests him by mentioning the invasion of Wales. Askeladd asks King Sven to reconsider his plans, stating that trying to conquer the land would not be worth the cost. The king praises Askeladd for his loyalty in front of everyone, but quietly tells him that if he brings him Canute's head, he will spare Wales. Askeladd is faced with the difficult choice between his country and the prince. The king continues to offend Askeladd by saying that Wales is only good for its slaves. Leif takes Thorfinn to his ship, but he leaves without saying anything. Askeladd loses his temper and calls the king ugly, in an attempt to cause trouble. Canute stops Thorkel from taking any action. Askeladd then reveals the name his mother gave him, Lucius Artorius Castus, and claims to be the legitimate king of Britannia, before beheading King Sven. Canute orders his soldiers to kill Askeladd, but Thorfinn rushes into the hall to help him. Askeladd kills everyone who attempts to attack him, while the elders try to escape. Canute notices that Askeladd chose to save both Wales and his life, and he is only feigning madness in order to take the blame for killing the king. Floki engages with Askeladd. Right before Thorfinn could reach them, Canute stabs him. This improves Canute's standing with the elders by a huge margin. Thorfinn loses his prey right in front of his eyes. He tries to help Askeladd, but instead, Askeladd wants Thorfinn to end him. Frustrated, Thorfinn shakes Askeladd's body, demanding a duel. Canute explains why he had to be punished, but Thorfinn attacks him without even listening. Thorkel prevents him, and everyone wants to kill Thorfinn, but Canute stops them. Floki tries to send the prince to his chamber and take control, but Canute announces that he will act as commander of the army and the ruler of England. He will not pursue the subjugation of Wales, instead he will make preparations against English revolts now that the former king has passed away. As Thorfinn is being taken away, he drops his father's dagger.